Good morning and welcome to our UU Holton Sunday Service online edition, coming to you from the Unitarian Parlor in Holton, Maine. It's a beautiful day here where we are, and we hope it's the same for you. Even the grass is starting to turn green outside, an encouraging sign indeed. Thank you for joining us and spending part of your day right here. Our chalice reading this morning is from the UUA Worship app. The chalice lit among us is a beacon of hope in a world in crisis, a beacon of possibility made manifest through our close interconnections, a beacon of light illuminating our shared wisdom, a beacon of connection by our being here together. In this moment of centering silence, may we stop and take note of just this moment in time where time is not a factor as much as it is an experience. Open space, our breath, the sounding of a bell, just this. In observation of Earth Day, which is this Thursday, April 22nd, opening words are by poet and naturalist Diane Ackerman. In the name of the daybreak and the eyelids of a morning and the wayfaring moon and the night when it departs, I swear I will not dishonor my soul with hatred, but humbly offer myself as a guardian of nature, as a healer of misery, as a messenger of wonder and an architect of peace. I will honor all life wherever and in whatever form it may dwell on earth, which is my home, and in the mansion of the stars. As is our custom at UU Holton, let us light candles, real and virtual, for the joys and concerns in our life. We light this first candle of joy for a fine spring day in anticipation of flowers soon to arrive. This morning I picked a yellow daffodil that is just about ready to open, and I'm sure it will. And lighting a candle for Earth Day 2021. This is the 51st Earth Day. We have made a lot of gains, but we still have great challenges ahead. Today's service is on grief, and as we look at changes occurring on our planet, it's like we're in the early parts of a grieving process as climate shifts and the changes that we notice around us. Just this week, an article was in the paper was talking about the Denali National Park, the glacier moving at a record-breaking pace in the park. And we're lighting this candle of concern for another shooting. Dante Wright, a 20-year-old black man just outside Minneapolis, Minnesota. We pray that the madness and the violence will end. And let's light the crisis candle. Second attempt. Again, the crisis candle for the world pandemic, coronavirus, as it continues. We light this candle to remember to light the darkness for those lives that we have lost. And we're lighting a silent candle today for those concerns that are upon your heart, and prayers for people that you're thinking of this morning. We'll just take a few moments, some space to hold these names and people, and I'll say a prayer here in just a moment. For those concerns and those names mentioned this morning, we hold them in the light of love and compassion. May all benefit in this world with well-being, sound mind, and the peaceful resolution of conflict. We stand as one on this day and in this precious life. Amen, and blessed be. For our music selection today, we have another original song by Craig Werth, minister of the UU Church in Nottingham, New Hampshire. This is titled Spark of Kindness and was released last April, a year ago. Here's part of the lyric. What does it take to make an offering? Why wait until tomorrow? A spark of kindness is such a tiny thing. A spark of kindness can shake and break the sorrow.
There's a star above our brother. He would see if he looked up someday. There's a message for another, could tear some troubles down. A little light upon the water would weary sailor find her way. There's a son and here's a daughter, could use a steady hand. What does it take to make an offering? Why wait until tomorrow? A spark of kindness, such a tiny thing, can shake and break a sorrow. What does it take to make an offering? Why wait until tomorrow? A spark of kindness, such a tiny thing, can shake and break a sorrow.
To open today's talk, I have a poem by Mary Oliver from her book, Blue Horses. And the title of this poem is, What We Want. In a poem, people want something fancy, but even more, they want something inexplicable made plain, easy to swallow. Not unlike a suddenly harmonic passage in an otherwise difficult and sometimes dissonant symphony, even if it is only for the moment of hearing it. So like the poem, this talk today is not anything fancy or remarkable. It is my frail attempt to take something inexplicable and try to make it plain, or more so. And if not easy to follow, at least point you in the right direction to help you find out for yourself. The title of today's talk is The Loss of Grief. And I want to share a few thoughts on how grief and the grief process is a central aspect of living a spiritual and meaningful life, even as the pain and the loss itself seem to undermine such an outcome. Life is subject to change, loss, and more often than we would like, tragic circumstances. And these unwelcome developments are typically unexpected and oftentimes unfold on a dubious and uncontrollable timetable. America, and we, American citizens, do not have a natural propensity for acknowledging grief and working through the grief recovery process. We have an ingrained tendency, almost like it's in our national DNA, to downplay or relegate such matters to the sidelines of our national identity. When I speak of the loss of grief, I'm referring to the absence of ritual or recognition of grief in our civic life. In times of national crisis or shared tragic events, a country and its individual members need leadership, places, rituals, ceremonies, poetry, and policies that address and support the grieving needs of the people. We are in one of these places right now, not just the United States, but all the world. This past 12 months has been a long year of loss, tragedy, and insecurity, anxiety surrounding the coronavirus pandemic and all of its collateral effects. At this point, we are well into the grief process, but many are still unaware or perhaps have not acknowledged the extent to which they and so many others have lost. In Elizabeth Kubler-Ross's famous 5 stages of grief model, the first stage is denial, or refusing to recognize what has happened. But it can also mean not even realizing you are in a grief process. You are grieving, but you don't know it. This is also what I mean by the loss of grief. We aren't conscious or aware of the grief process at all, even though we are in the early stages of it. An article in this week's New York Times written by Alison Gilbert, an author who writes extensively about grief and resilience, whose latest book is Past and Present: Keeping Memories of Loved Ones Alive. She had this to say about the recent pandemic. The end of the COVID-19 crisis in the United States is in sight, but the still growing death toll will leave millions of bereaved people, racked by the suffering that the loss of a loved one can bring. This is a public health crisis with consequences that may last generations, and for which we do not currently have the policy tools or resources to address. We first need to get a sense of the scope of our national grief. Researchers are just beginning to count the bereaved, and while current estimates suggest 5 million Americans have lost a loved one to COVID-19, the final tally is likely to be much larger. Ashton Verderi, an associate professor of sociology and demography at Pennsylvania State University, recently led a study that introduced the COVID-19 bereavement multiplier. By his team's calculus, for every person who dies of COVID-19, 9 loved ones are left behind. To arrive at that number, the researchers included the losses of spouses, siblings, parents, children, and grandparents. If other relatives, like nieces, nephews, aunts, uncles, step-parents, and friends are taken into account, you may get 10 times or more people affected by grief. Another recent study found that at least 37,000 children in the United States have lost a parent to COVID-19 so far. These are numbers, but remember, each number is a person and a personal story that we must grieve. Grief is a core component of the human experience. Love and loss are an inseparable pair that accompany us our entire lifetime. We are constantly saying hello and goodbye. If we ignore grief or try to avoid its pain, we will only create more suffering and pain. Love and loss is a continual process that requires a skillful heart, strong emotions, and keen insight. There are no cheap and easy answers on this test. So here is my 1-sentence or 11-word sermon this morning on grief. If this is all you remember, then we're good. Grief is the allowance of change and the honoring of memory. I'll say it again, just to make sure you get it. Grief is the allowance of change and the honoring of memory. As I said earlier, life is subject to change. Sometimes those changes are so incremental that you barely notice, but sometimes they are so large that it's difficult, seemingly impossible, to absorb their impact or sort through all of their many implications. They are truly life-altering. Grief is the practice of allowing for change, large and small. It's a recognition of what or who has been lost and coming to terms with the absence. This is the allowance. These are the difficult and demanding first 4 steps of Kubler-Ross's 5-step method: denial, anger, bargaining, depression. The 5th step of acceptance or allowance is the aim of grief practice. The first 4 stages can occur in any order or reoccurring order depending on the individual, and the timetable is just as individual. But as the grief process resolves, a new space opens, and you may have thought it never would, but it does. And in that space is room for an okayness that wasn't there before. Grief is the allowance of change and also the honoring of memory. In that new space, there is the memory of who or what was lost. If you retain the memory, the content, and the impact of who or what you are grieving, then they are not totally gone, only partly so. And with even that parcel, you have something of value that can never be taken away from you. The great poets say that love, once expressed, is eternal. Love, in this sense, is timeless and not subject to calendar or location. Once you have it, you have it. Grief is a looking back to what we had, to that which is no longer here in the physical sense, but we still recall and retell the stories, the adventures, the mishaps, and the memories. But grief is also a looking ahead. It's a moving forward into a future that is different from our past, and we move forward without those who were here before, but move forward we must, and we do so, carrying them along with us in our memory and in our mind that is not as subject to time as we might have thought. We are not alone. We carry a multitude with us: ancestors, teachers, mentors, lovers, animals, plants, and the precious earth itself. We are grieving so much right now. The loss of life during the global pandemic, the loss of jobs, livelihoods, and economic productivity, the loss of mobility and international travel restrictions, the loss of in-person public contact in public places, the loss of political civility in our national discourse, the loss of basic civil rights and tolerance in our society. And in light of Earth Day, we reflect on the loss and changes facing our planet as we are in an Earth crisis of proportions we have never faced in our recorded history. To grieve is to recognize the change and the loss. It's a time to lament. It's a time to articulate those losses. It's a time to plan ahead and to start to make adjustments to the changing world that we are a part. We do this as individuals. We do this as communities of faith and neighborhood. We do this as a nation. We do this as global citizens and as a global community. We are all in this together. Here's a short reading from, as you can tell, one of my favorite childhood books, Lemony Snicket. It's a curious thing, the death of a loved one. We all know that our time in this world is limited, and yet it is always a surprise when it happens to someone we know. It is like walking up the stairs to our bedroom in the dark and thinking there is one more stair than there is. Your foot falls down through the air, and there is a sickly moment of dark surprise as you try to readjust the way you thought of things. If you have ever lost someone very important to you, then you already know how it feels. And if you haven't, you cannot possibly imagine it. If you've had the experience of coming to the top of a stairway in the dark and thinking there's one more step and there's not, you know what it feels like for your foot to drop through thin air and there's nothing there. It's an empty jolt, and then you land hard wondering, where did that go? As I was working on this talk, I tried revisiting a personal loss just to see what was still there. It's been 2.5 years, but as I reconstructed the painful details of the event in my mind, it was just as if it had happened right then. Sometimes the mind and the emotions can't tell the difference between then and now. I've run this self-trauma check several times before, each time with the same result. So I don't replay the events any more than I have to, or all that often. But what I have done is come to realize that painful loss is closely related to strong love. That's why the hurt hurts so much. My grief process includes valuing which I have lost. I will carry that with me. I will carry the memories with me. I will continue to carry the love that I experienced with that most special one. And it is right here in this moment, in time and beyond time. Time cannot contain it, yet it is within my reach at all times. As I've gotten older, I've noticed it doesn't take much anymore to get to me. I've caught myself getting emotional over a car commercial if I've happened to own one of those cars before. When Linda and I are watching something on Netflix, she can tell when my breathing pattern changes as I try to fight off and cover up a tear-jerk reaction. At this point, my life, 60 years now, is so full of people, memories, and experiences that it doesn't take much to trigger an emotional saturation point. I'm starting to embrace that as okay. I'm glad that I can feel something deeply, even if it's painful or difficult at times. What I have come to realize is that painful loss is closely related to strong love. That's why the hurt hurts so much. Grief is the allowance of change and the honoring of memory. In closing, here are insightful words shared by those who have lived and loved with gusto, even when it hurts. Kahil Gibran, when you are sorrowful, look again in your heart, and you will see that in truth you are weeping for that which has been your delight. Dr. Seuss. Don't cry because it's over. Smile because it happened. From Rumi, grief can be the garden of compassion. If you keep your heart open through everything, your pain can become your greatest ally in your life's search for love, wisdom, and happiness. Elizabeth Kubler-Ross. The reality is that you will grieve forever. You will not get over the loss of a loved one, but you will learn to live with it. You will heal and you will build yourself around the loss you have suffered. You will be whole again, but you will never be the same, nor should you be the same or would want to. And the last quote from the new Marvel television series, WandaVision. But what is grief if not love persevering? My closing words to you. Open your heart to what you have lost and hold in that space the love that remains. My best to you on this day. Peace and well-being to you all. And now may the blessings of life be upon us and upon this congregation. May the memories we gather here give us hope for the future. May the love that we share bring strength and joy to our hearts, and the peace of this community be with us until we meet again. Blessed be. I want to thank you all for joining us on today's UU Holton weekly service. Like and subscribe on our YouTube channel. Practice kindness, keep your attitude positive, and look out for those having a difficult time. I want to thank our cameraman, Fan Carmichael, for filming today's service and doing our production work. Couldn't do it without you. So we'll see you next week right here. Have a great rest of your day, everyone.
Roll it.